Hello everyone and welcome once again to Android Developer Office Hours. My name is Joe Mallon, I'm your moderator. Next to me is Trevor Johns, and then down the line in his official Android workers hat is Dan Galpin. Our engineer today is Dan Pham. We have some great questions here today, but I also encourage you to come into our Hangout or type in your questions as well. We've got lots of time to do that today. We're bringing up Hangouts as quickly as we can, so bear with us. Meanwhile, we'll hop into our first question on moderator. And that is, gentlemen,
should your app store
all data that's not sensible in /SD card, as /data is quite small on some phones? But on the other hand, data in /SD card on the Galaxy Nexus ends up in /data/. And personally, I'd prefer /data. What's the best way to handle this?
I'm a little confused about what he means by /data versus /data/, because that's the same path. I'm wondering if what he means is that information stored on /SD card on Galaxy Nexus is still stored somewhere inside of /data because the device doesn't have a external SD card.
Right.
So I'm not sure where else you'd put the data in that case.
I assume what he means in this case is /SD card /Android/data. That's the only. I mean, it's the only place that is actually where it's going to end up getting stored. And even it's the only real difference is on Galaxy Nexus is one of them has a case dependent file system and the other one doesn't. And one of them is, of course, accessible to other applications. So I think that if it's sensitive data, as a general rule, you want to avoid storing it on the SD card. If you're storing a lot of data, the SD card is safer. And then the real question is, how do you detect a device like Galaxy Nexus, which is using contiguous storage between both? And that is kind of an interesting question. As a general rule, we don't really suggest actually using a different approach based upon the different devices. But the goal, going forward, it's really nice to have devices where it's all one file system like Galaxy Nexus, so you don't have to actually worry about this. And it's kind of a nice benefit of the design. I don't know. Any comments on best practice around that, Trevor? Is there a way to detect whether or not you have a single file system or multiple?
Yeah, well, you can check the external storage state, which should tell you whether or not there's actually an SD card mounted or available.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, I usually, I think the rule is just look at what type of data it is. Like Dan said, if it's something that's small and or sensitive, it's usually best to place it inside of in the app's private tree within /data. If it's large and or publicly or should be publicly accessible, then you should put it on the SD card, regardless of whether or not that's a real SD card or not. And then the only other thing you have to watch out for is the case where there's not an SD card present. So a device that uses external storage but the users remove the SD card, in which case you really only have one choice, which is internal storage. Or I suppose you could refuse to run, but let's avoid that possibility. Normally you want your app to run. But yeah, I think just looking at the use case, what type of data you're storing will dictate where you store it, and regardless of whether or not it's actually a real SD card or not, shouldn't make a difference.
Yeah, the real question is the word is in the question is sensible, and I'm not sure if we mean.
I think he means sensitive there.
I don't know. That's what I was because sensible in terms of large data, it would make sense. So large data, generally you want to put on the SD card. Sensitive, data you want to put on in the data space. So I guess that's the best we can do there. So on a Galaxy Nexus though, will it always show up as an SD card mounted, or will it never show up as an SD card mounted?
Oh, that's a good question. I want to say it'll show up as mounted because that way, that's how you determine whether or not you can actually even attempt to write there. Yeah, so it should show up as always mounted.
Right. That's what I thought. Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Now, you do also have to watch out that if the user is using an older device that uses a fat file system for external storage, in other words, it's using an SD card, when the user connects the device to their computer and turns on USB storage, even though the SD card is still attached, it'll become unmounted as far as your application is concerned. So it is possible for the SD card to disappear even when it's inserted in the device.
Now,
So on older devices, it is a lot more common than I think a lot of developers realize.
Yeah, and if you actually have a file handle open on that SD card, it will Android will immediately terminate your application. So when the SD card is unmounted, so that's the other side of using it.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Our next question is, my activity has a spinner in the action bar. Each spinner item corresponds to a fragment. I have a use case where if I select an item from one fragment, I have to replace the current fragment with another fragment. How do I manage the back stack?
Okay, so I'm not sure if it really even matters whether or not there's a fragment there or not. I think that the big question here is what's the correct user experience? And when it comes to something like a spinner in the action bar, I like to think of this as similar to tabs at the top. And if you look at pretty much every system application that uses tabs, when you switch tabs, back doesn't take you back to the old tab. It'll take you back to the previous activity, which in many cases means just right out of your application, assuming this is your home screen. And so I think with a spinner, the behavior should be the same. So when you switch tabs, don't change what's in your back stack. And for those of you who don't have a lot of experience with fragments, whenever you do a fragment transition, it's up to the developer to determine what the new state of the back stack should be. So in this case, it would just be as simple as not doing anything to the back stack. Leave it as is. Whatever was in there previously will still be your previous entry, and when you hit back, you'll go to that.
And the more interesting question is the question with you have a fragment and you click on something in one fragment and replaces that fragment with another fragment. And my assumption in this one, my assumption in this one is that if we actually are again having two methods of switching between these fragments, one that's using spinners and one that's using the being able to click on one fragment and replace it, it probably makes sense to not put it on the back stack. If it is feeling again like a transition to a completely different state, then it may make sense. And I think that one's the only thing that's tricky at that point is what happens to those spinners in the action bar. Are you actually changing the state of the action bar to disable those spinners at that point? And again, there's just not enough information in this question to give a really thorough answer. But I think again, it ultimately comes down to the user experience. As far as managing the backstack itself, you obviously it's fairly straightforward to assign IDs to the various fragments, and you can actually very easily look to see whether that fragment is currently in the backstack. You can pull it out of the backstack. There's a lot of stuff in fragments to actually manage it. But in this case, we're really talking about the user experience rather than the kind of mechanics of it.
Right, and I think a good example, if you need something to look at what correct behavior would be Gmail. So Gmail has a spinner in the action bar. It has a lot of different activities, a lot of different states. And so add two Google accounts to your phone, fire up Gmail, and play around, right? You'll notice if you do switch accounts and you hit back, it doesn't switch back to the other account. It doesn't count that as a state change. But if you open a message and go back, that does. Now, when you do open a message, the spinner disappears, and it gets replaced with the action bar is updated to reflect your new context, which is viewing a message rather than viewing your account list and your message list. So, a lot of subtle details there you need to take into account, but I think that's a good example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Next question. I'd like to put a view pager on half of a two-pane layout. Can I put a view pager in a fragment and more fragments in that view pager? I'd like my left pane to hold swipeable lists and the right pane to contain details of list items that are clicked.
So this is one of those cases in which I would say that it's not strictly necessary to use a fragment. And in fact, as a general rule, our dev team tries to discourage people from putting fragments within fragments. The goal that's really what views are intended for. The fragment really is the idea of a fragment is really to maintain some state that you're going to be showing in two different kind of application states, whether that is alone and by itself in a full screen view that's going to have an activity and a fragment stack associated with it, or if it's going to be in a side-by-side like tablet layout. It's trying to take those pieces and turn them into reusable components. In this case, I think it's almost always a better idea to actually just use the view hierarchy itself. The actual pager actually does not, view pager actually can be done without any fragments at all. It works quite well just with views, and ergo view pager, and that's how I would do it. I don't think there's any particular advantage in using a fragment here.
Now, let's say that you still have some reason that you want to do this. There are some caveats that you should be aware from a technical perspective. If you try and display a fragment, or a view pager inside of a fragment which contains another view pager, Fragment Manager can get a little bit confused about how to resolve all of that when you do a transition. And from what I've heard, even though I've never tried to do it myself, you can, the solution would be to make sure that you don't set your view pager's adapter until after the first transition is completed. And that's as simple as making sure that's done inside of an async task or a handler, something like that, just making sure that it's delayed a bit. And then by the time you're rendering that, the second fragment, the first fragment's already there. Again, though, you probably don't want to be doing this.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely put, a view pager, inside of a fragment, and you can certainly put whatever you want inside of that view pager. The real tricky thing is, of course, is when you get into these multiple view pager states, and there is some mechanism that's actually in Jelly Bean that actually does handle some of this. Unfortunately, it's not, which allows it to actually track the scrollability of an internal window, which allows a lot of, like, if you have a view pager within a view pager, you can actually do stuff like scroll to the end of one, and then have that once it's finished scrolling, it'll actually scroll to the next in the primary view pager, stuff like that. But none of that is actually available in the default implementation that you're going to use for across all the different Android versions. So there is some work if you want that kind of experience. Again, from your question, it sounds like you're more interested in just having a view pager inside of a fragment, and that's fine.
Okay.
All right. And so Daniel's telling me that we finally have Hangouts up. For those of you who are joining live, feel free to hop on. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, just as a reminder for everyone else, you are certainly welcome to go and hop onto our Hangout and ask us questions live. We'd love to hear from you. And if your question's already in the moderator queue, feel free to hop on too. A lot of times, we can ask you for more details, and it's just we can give you a better answer if you're on here to have a discussion with us. So we do have a limit, 10 people at a time. So try to make sure that you're only joining the moderator, if you're only joining the Hangout if you actually have a question to ask, just to make sure we keep those slots open. And for everyone else, feel free to watch the live stream either on YouTube or developers.google.com. Plus, you get a better picture if you're watching the YouTube version than the Hangout version. So YouTube for watching, Hangouts for live questions, and definitely hop on and ask us questions. We'd love to hear from you.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next question. To frequently sync a database from the cloud into SQLite on Android, should I use a background service activated by a wake-up alarm or a sync adapter? And if I use the latter, what do I need an account for? Or do I really?
So that depends on the nature of what you're syncing. It depends. If you need, if you have account credentials, you don't necessarily need to implement an account. It's entirely possible to go and place them into a shared preferences file or something like that. What we said earlier, make sure your private data is actually being stored on internal storage rather than the SD card. Make sure it's set to mode private so no other apps can access it. But you normally don't need an account unless you're providing authentication credentials to other services on the device. So, for example, if you implement or if you want to talk to Google services, you can talk to the Google account and ask for an auth token. That's what Account Manager lets you do. Now, going back to your original question, though, should you use a background service or sync adapter? If you use sync adapter, Android will periodically go and sync your data on a schedule that it determines. This is a good thing because it makes sure that the phone can do things like optimizing for battery life. It's really bad to go and have all sorts of different services syncing at different times, because that means it has to wake the radio up a lot if it can go and batch those into one big sync operation across all apps on the phone. Sync adapter is great for that. It's good for your users. That being said, if it's a fairly infrequent task, or if you have some really odd semantics that would prevent SyncAdapter from working properly, background service works perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that, other than, like I said, you don't get the optimizations that SyncAdapter gives you.
Yeah, I think the real question was, because if you're talking about the latter, is do we need an account in order to use SyncAdapter? That's I think
Right.
the question he was curious about.
I would say that reading this and knowing about how SyncAdapter is used in things like Contacts Provider, my guess is that he's asking things about an account because Sample SyncAdapter, which is about the only documentation we have for SyncAdapters, uses auth tokens. And the answer that I would give in that context is that's not required. It's there to show you how to use it, but you don't have to use it.
Yeah.
It's used there because Sample SyncAdapter syncs to a Google service that needs authorization, and using the structure that Sample SyncAdapter uses, you only have to provide like an account name and a password once, and then an authorization token is stored. So you don't. So that helps using SyncAdapter because SyncAdapter doesn't have to be able to count on being able to go back to the user.
Yeah, there are many open web services that aren't going to require account information.
Right.
And SyncAdapter is still a great way of making sure that the phone can kind of optimize, the system can optimize for battery life.
There's some. There are a lot of things that SyncAdapter gives you for free. As Trevor said, it schedules things automatically at a good time, batches up things together. It will also check to make sure it won't run if you don't have network connectivity. So you don't have to go off and test for yourself that the network's available. SyncAdapter will do that for you. So it's just a question of how compatible your particular app model is with what SyncAdapter does. And I hope that answers the question. Do we have anything out there in Hangout land? No?
Yeah, we sure do.
Oh, good.
I'm
Super.
actually going to put Jared on.
Go ahead.
1 second. Jared, alright, Jared should be live. Go ahead.
Hey.
Hold on a sec, we don't actually hear you.
Hold on.
Hold on.
Second.
Try the red knob, Dan.
Push the red button.
It's not it.
Red knob on the Hangout slider. Alright, go ahead and try talking again.
No.
Now, let's see, speakers are on. Speakers are very on.
Yes, you're going to be loud when we hear you.
Try hitting volume up, Dan, on the Mac.
Hello?
Oh boy. Alright, we're experiencing some technical difficulties. Stand by for a second. Is it muted?
It is not muted.
Alright, red slider is up. Red knob above Hangouts is up.
Yeah, we're all good.
Do you see any audio coming in from the computer on the
Try
level satellite?
tweaking some.
Try jiggling the cable going to the speakers out from the board.
As you can see, Trevor is a prime troubleshooter here.
Right. Nope.
I was expecting some noise there.
Ooh,
Oh, we heard something. Try talking again. Let's see if we can hear you now. No?
No.
Are you getting audio on the computer? Like, do you see his level indicator moving?
Yes.
Alright, so the soundboard's working. Do you have the cables plugged into the right ports?
Is it plugged in? Is it turned on?
Alright,
This is great.
hit the volume adjust button. Let's see if we get any audio.
These are all the same things I do when I'm debugging.
Aha! Alright.
All right, that's good.
Alright,
Much
try
better.
talking now.
How about now?
Ah!
Okay,
We can
have
hear
sound. Excellent.
It only took 2 minutes.
Cool. That's
Alright.
good.
So I'm having some trouble with spinner in my action bar.
Okay.
After using it for a certain period of time, it doesn't seem to matter how long, or there's no constant on how long or how many interactions with the app. But basically what will happen is the spinner will stop working, and Android, outside of my apps logcat, will report that the window's already focused and it's ignoring the focus gain. And I've seen this all over Stack Overflow, but I haven't seen any answers that pertain to an actual spinner.
And does it actually cause any problems for your app, or is it just messages in Logcat?
The user input is ignored. It doesn't even make it to the app.
Okay. Interesting.
Because the warning, it's Android is reporting a warning from the tag is input method manager service, and it says window already focused, ignoring focus gain of com.android internal view, and that occurs in the system logcat. If I look at my apps filter, it doesn't show up at all.
And what device are you on here? Just out of curiosity, what version and what?
This is a Galaxy Nexus
Okay.
Jelly Bean.
Okay.
That's a tough one.
And the nearest I can tell is it happens when I do a lot of changes to the data adapter for the spinner. Like the specific thing is that the spinner stores a bunch of locations, and if I delete locations and then reset the data adapter to the spinner, after maybe 3 or 4 of those, it'll stop functioning. Or if I use other views in the activity for a while and then try and change on the spinner, it stops functioning.
Now, are you actually changing out the spinner's adapter, or are you just telling it that the data's changed?
Well, I tried telling it just that the data has changed, but that didn't seem to actually reset the contents, so I'm actually changing the adapter.
Okay, that might be a hint there then. Because when you're going to change the adapter, there's a lot of work that goes on under the hood to go and update everything. It normally should be enough to make sure the data is present in your adapter, and then telling the spinner that the data has changed. That's the sort of the canonical way to go and update anything that uses an adapter.
Repeat that again. It broke up a little bit.
Sorry, I was saying, normally you want to make sure you update your adapter and then tell the spinner or whatever control you're using that the data has changed. That's sort of the canonical way to update anything that is displaying the contents of an adapter on Android. So my guess is your problem has something to do with the fact that you're changing the adapter out entirely. Now the other problem is, how do we fix that so that when you call data's you notify that the data has changed, that update has taken effect? And normally that should be automatic. As soon as you call that method, the update, the contents should change. So there's something else going on there too.
If I'm using an array list to back the adapter, and I change the array list, then I should just call notify dataset changes on the adapter.
That's correct.
And then, so I need to register the actual spinner with that, right? Or does that automatically cause the spinner to update?
The spinner should update as soon as your adapter has been updated.
Yeah, well, the spinner is with notified dataset changed.
I think you have to register that.
I think notified dataset changes is usually when you're tied to content, right?
That's true.
Right.
So we're talking about so if you're not actually generating this from a content provider, then notified dataset changes isn't going to do anything, because it's going to notify the registered content listeners, and there aren't going to be any content listeners because there's no providers.
Right, which is exactly what I ran into. I'd call it, nothing would happen.
Yes.
Now, I wonder if it's possible that you're actually making a copy of the array when you try to update it, and the adapter still has a handle on the old one. Is it possible that might be happening somehow?
Well, I have a class that keeps track of that array list, and it will reorder things in the list, remove things from the list, add things to the list. And then after that function returns is when I'm trying to update the spinner.
Okay, so it probably should still be the same copy then.
Right.
Interesting.
So right now the only way it works most of the time, except for after a little bit, after a certain amount of interaction.
Right, but that's where you
reset
change
the
out.
contents.
That's where you're changing out your adapter, though, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And
So you really
seems
shouldn't have to
very-
go and change the whole adapter. I think that's definitely not the right way to go. That's first off, even ignoring the fact that this is breaking, swapping an adapter is a relatively heavy operation.
Well, that
And
would
when
certainly
you think about the
explain
way
that.
it's supposed to work, your adapter normally is tied to a SQLite database. Nothing wrong with tying it to an array or anything else, but normally they're tied to a database. And every time the database updates, you're not going to go and rebuild a whole new adapter and update it. It should just update in place.
Right.
So
So then how do I get the spinner to update when I change the array list?
That's a good question. Normally, my understanding was just updating the array list should be enough. Dan's searching on his phone there.
Invalidate the view maybe, or?
You shouldn't have to do that. That's something that the spinner should do itself.
Mm-hmm.
Are you finding anything interesting on your phone over there, Dan?
And it definitely didn't work.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to go take a look at what's actually going on in the code. My experience is that it should. See, with notifies the dataset changed. Yeah, it's been a while since I. Because the problem is that dataset change is based on the content observer pattern, and the content observer pattern is.
Right. I mean, the way this is architected, the spinner, that's your view, should be independent. It should be, shouldn't care what's happening inside of your adapter, which is your which is responsible again for that's your data observer essentially. Actually, I believe, or is the data observer the spinner? In any case, it's supposed to be all compartmentalized. Your view is independent of what the adapter is doing, and the adapter should, as soon as there's any updates to the underlying data model you're using, your array, it should automatically propagate those updates back up to the view. And something fishy is going on here between the interaction between your array and your adapter. I think we need to take a look at your code and see what you're actually doing there.
I should probably get this on Stack Overflow for you guys to look at. But basically, the pattern is I have a class that manages a list. When that class makes any changes to the list, it notifies the activity. And right now, the activity resets the adapter, which is obviously incorrect, but
it technically should work. I mean, it's
yeah, but it's still not the way you normally should do it.
It's not the way you should do it, but you shouldn't end up with this problem. This seems like you're running into some sort of probably some race case and issue where there's the item that's focused is not actually getting cleared correctly. It does sound like there's some weirdness. And
it is a little odd too that if you're navigating around your views, not interacting with the spinner at all, that the spinner will suddenly stop working.
Right. Now, we implemented a sliding drawer type of view. And if I use a view element in that drawer, then the spinner completely stops working.
And this doesn't modify your array at all, right? Your data is still the same?
No changes to the data set. I haven't even modified the data adapter.
Okay, so you're not changing it there. So there's got to be a second issue at play. Yeah, I think we need to take a look at your code. It's probably something very subtle. I mean, your overall approach here doesn't sound like it should be causing this many problems.
Right. That's kind of what I was feeling. I've spent a week and a half trying to find this, and I'm at wit's end trying to figure out what is causing this issue. So I'll post as much as I can on Stack Overflow, and hopefully it'll be enough.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Just be sure to post a link to the question in the comments. Was your question about you? This is not the question earlier about a spinner, right? You're a different person.
I'm the one at the top of the chat, but not on moderator.
Okay. Post a link in. Actually, chat's going to get erased when we log out. Can you put it as a question on the G Plus link for this, or the G Plus? Yeah. If you go to Google Plus, you'll see a post for this event. Leave it as a comment there, and that'll stick around after the show ends, just so we can make sure we can find your question after, right. And then we can go ahead and get you some more information offline.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for your patience. Do we have anybody else out there? No? Okay, we'll go back to moderator here. I want to use an HDMI capture device to make demo tutorial videos for my apps. Before I something in a capture device, will HDCP prevent me from recording the HDMI stream when the device is displaying my app? Will results vary depending on the Android device?
So in modern devices, we've actually added the ability to have the concept of protected content versus unprotected content. And I don't believe that there's a lot of older devices that'll mirror that don't have this flag. So your application can actually choose to say that you're actually have a protected stream on with the latest version. I'm like looking at Trevor like I think that's right.
It sounds right to me. Yeah.
So as long as your app isn't doing that, you shouldn't have any issues with HDCP. We regularly capture video on the Friday review and on the app clinic on Friday as well. So I think that's the real issue is actually getting an HDMI capture device. It's going to work well with your Android device is probably the larger issue there. It's sometimes some HDMI capture devices may not actually do a complete negotiation of HDMI parameters, so we run into that as an issue. So beware. The EDID really does need to. Some of the Android devices really do need to get a valid EDID coming back from the device that they're plugged into, and not all capture devices will actually present that. So that would be my only concern there. So my suggestion is if you get a capture device, make sure that you can return it, because until you've actually tested it against your specific device, you're not going to really know whether or not it's going to be able to do that successfully.
Yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes it. HDMI capture in general is always sort of tricky. HDMI is a consumer protocol. It wasn't really designed to be easy to record, and you're going to find yourself, it's not an Android-specific thing, just the nature of working with HDMI. You're going to find yourself fighting the system all along the way as you try and record a source. Unfortunately, there's not a good consumer replacement available out there. As far as how we do it here in the studio, we convert everything, cameras, tablets, everything we can, we convert into HD SDI, and that's a much easier format to work with. But like Dan said, our HD SDI converter boxes still have some trouble decoding the signal from Android, and that's on the HDMI side. And there's tricks you can use to get around it. There's some devices out there that'll modify the EDID and try and fix the negotiation bugs we've run into, but it is a bit of work, and be prepared to spend some time getting things to give you a nice video signal. I'm just going to go and say, curse the people who made HDMI. When it works, though, it works beautifully. When it works.
Right.
But you'll be able to get it, I'm sure. If you do need any links to possible hardware, feel free to follow up with us offline. We can give you some product recommendations. Probably not something we should cover on the air, just because I don't want to go mentioning a whole list of brand names, but we'd be happy to help you off on a one-by-one basis, or a one-on-one basis, and let you know what hardware we use here. Okay,
great. Thank you. Anything else, Dan?
Nope.
No?
Enough for me. I'm looking at the next question already.
Okay, good. Super. Could you offer some tips about using ProGuard for an app that references many libraries? I've spent a lot of time on using ProGuard to no avail. The primary errors are duplicate class definitions and library classes depending on program classes. Gentlemen.
So, I think the first thing to do is make sure you are actually starting with our ProGuard file, for our ProGuard configuration file, which we do ship as part of the SDK, and it's added into every project that is created using the Eclipse tools. And that at least will make sure on the Android side of things that you are leaving the pieces unobfuscated that need to be left unobfuscated. I think the trickier part is what's going on in your specific situation involving libraries, and I assume we're talking here about just Java libraries rather than library projects. My experience is that library projects actually work quite reasonably well with obfuscation, because ultimately they're just built into the same jar and it's all one thing that's obfuscated all together. I don't, in terms of, what's interesting in the case of, and I think that's actually what you're going to want to do, is make sure that all your libraries are all statically bound into one jar file, and rather than trying to obfuscate the jar file and then try to bind those independently into the Android file, because otherwise it's all going to get shoved into one giant Dalvik mess, and all of the obfuscated names are going to collide. I think that might be what's going on here. Again, I haven't tried to do this from the command line tools, but that's my current theory. But again, if you statically link it into one bundle, I think it will actually do what you want it to do. Any comments there?
That's pretty much the same thing I'd recommend. Otherwise, make sure you. There are some things that ProGuard just has a very hard time optimizing around, especially links between classes that are not explicitly referenced or things like that. And sometimes you just have to tell ProGuard to exclude those classes from being optimized. But
All right.
yeah, I mean, it's going to depend on the specifics for your application. So without seeing your source code, all we can do is give you very general advice.
Great. Thanks. Next question is, when taking pictures from the front camera, I see the images flipped, mirrored. What's the best way to handle it? And are there any code samples to draw free lines on image view, like the Draw Something app, but on an image view?
All right, let's start with the first question there.
Yeah.
So the way the camera flipping works, if you are looking at a front-facing camera, Android will automatically flip it.
Yeah.
There's some notes about that in the documentation, and I don't believe there's a way to override that behavior. Do you know of any, Dan?
No, not that I know of. I mean, the easiest thing to do, of course, is to implement a matrix to unflip it
Right.
when you are displaying it. That's pretty straightforward. The second question is, how do I draw lines onto an image view? And the answer is you don't. But what you can do is you can actually take and create a canvas that is using that image as its base, and then you can draw lines onto that canvas, and then you can get and that canvas can be based on a bitmap, and then you can put that bitmap back into an image view. So that's one way of doing it. Another way, of course, is to create a custom control that you could derive from image view, and that would be very similar. The only difference is you're going to, in the onDraw method, you're going to call the standard image views draw, and then you're going to then take that canvas and draw whatever else you need on top of it. So I think both of those are kind of reasonable approaches. It really depends on the performance. One thing that's interesting to note about drawing lines is if you're talking about drawing lots and lots and lots of line segments, especially in sort of continuous lines or allowing the user to kind of draw onto something, if you're using the built-in line drawing constructs, you will see that on accelerated canvases, things are going to start getting pretty slow, because every single time you draw a line segment and add it to that geometry, you're actually going to generate a new texture. So it might be a case where you might want to experiment with using a non-accelerated view, or actually do off-screen drawing, both of which will have approximately the same impact. But definitely, if you're talking about something where you want to show sort of continuous drawing, you may want to play with that from a performance perspective.
Yep. And as far as actual code samples, this is a pretty specific use case. I'm not aware of any that overlay line segments on top of an image view, but there are several examples of drawing apps within the SDK samples. I know there's one in API demos. It's not going to do line segments, but it does do just points. You can take a look at that and at least see how to go and render things onto a bitmap, and then go and convert that into something more usable. That's probably a good place to start.
Yeah, there's also a pretty good Android U on doing custom
controls. We should
yeah,
clarify
we should actually.
Right.
Android U, yeah, sorry. There's there's a developer guide, which we refer to.
Developer training,
which we refer to internally as being Android U. Thank you. And in developer training, there is actually a very good segment on making custom controls. And it actually draws a pie chart that's animated in WinView, and it's pretty cool. And so that might also help. Not exactly drawing lines, but it does involve drawing lines.
It involves drawing.
Involves drawing, yes.
Right. It would seem to me that you probably would want to have a custom control if you really want to have something like an image view or something like that as part of a larger application. Whereas if you're just trying to write an app that you take pictures and draw lines on top of it, you can probably get away with having some sort of canvas and drawing lines on top of that without necessarily having to implement it using an image view?
Yeah, it really depends on how you want to end up creating your screen.
Right.
It's helpful sometimes to have that custom view. And again, you could have that image be a background for your custom
Right.
view. It doesn't even have to be an image view. It really depends on the kind of control you want to have over the reproduction of that image. If you want
Right.
to be able to use the built-in image view options for scaling and positioning, then you might want to base it on image view. You've got a lot of options though there.
Okay. Next question.
Actually, before we move on,
Oops, sorry.
is anybody on the Hangout?
Yeah, that's a good
No?
question.
Okay.
Okay.
Just a reminder, for those of you who are watching live and have just tuned in, feel free to join us live by hopping on the Hangout and ask us whatever Android-related questions you want. We'd love to talk to you, and we have plenty of open spots. Otherwise, feel free to join us on our moderator, where you can go and vote on existing questions. So with that, back to the moderator queue.
Okay.
Next question from moderator. I'm implementing in-app billing, but when I try to buy some item in the sample app, I don't get a response to my app, and after a few minutes I get an error. Reason, too long to deliver. This bug was in known issues for almost a year. Is there some update?
Okay, I'll take that one, I guess. There's a lot of things at play here.
Thanks, Trevor.
There's a lot of different issues at play here, which is why that's been in known issues for so long. We fixed some of them are still outstanding, and there's been some new ones that cropped up recently. And collectively, all these will just really affect the rate at which users see these errors. The number of users who see it is a small fraction of users. But as a developer, you're likely to see, you're the one who's receiving all the user reports, so it's probably going to seem a little bit worse than it actually is. It's definitely a serious issue. We do take it seriously, and we are working to fix it. I can give you a little bit of background for. Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
So I had a question. So he's trying to buy one of the sample items in the sample application. Is that the
No, this is an actual item.
Right.
So
some item in sample? That's what I was trying to.
Yeah, well, it's an actual item. It's not
Right.
the Android test
So
SKU.
the key thing to make sure, and is the one is that the application has been uploaded to Google Play, that you're testing against the same version and the version that you've also activated, not necessarily published, but you've actually activated the version that's been uploaded. There are a lot of things that can cause errors.
Well, it wouldn't cause that error though.
It'll
cause other errors.
Okay.
cause others.
Let's go ahead, Trevor. Let's hear what you were going to say.
So basically, the important thing to know here is usually when users get that error, it's one of two things. And the most common one, almost always, is it just means that the user has been flagged for additional risk review. And we have a roughly 30-second timeout for an order to complete. If it takes longer than that, Google Play will cancel the order, and the user will see that error. In the background, we're still performing our risk review. If the user comes back and performs that purchase later, our usual recommendation is wait 24 hours. Sometimes it's a lot quicker, sometimes it can take longer. It depends on the individual circumstances. The order will go through. Basically, we have to go and vet that user and make sure that the order isn't fraudulent. We have a machine learning based approach to this. We have a lot of risk factors that go into our analysis, and we're actually pretty good at detecting when orders are fraudulent. Occasionally there's some false positives, and that's usually what you see here. Now, the other cases, occasionally there are some technical issues, like a credit card processor goes down, something like that, which can also cause that timeout. This is rare. But just so you know, every now and then, if something like that does happen, that can cause a temporary spike in these error messages too. Our advice to users is still the same. Just come back, try the order a little bit later, and it will go through if you try it later. So that's our advice. Again, we do take these errors really seriously. We handle it on a case-by-case basis, and if you do happen to see it, feel free to open up a ticket with Android developer support. If you go to developer.android.com, at the bottom there's a contact us link. Click that, open a ticket, and provide us your order IDs. The support team can go and double check and see exactly why that error happened, and escalate it to our engineering teams if it's something we haven't seen before.
Okay.
All right.
That sounds like the right thing to do. Next, we're still okay on Hangout, correct? All right. So next question from moderator. I develop OpenGL having in floating point. Since the docs, see the link, say that float and double are equivalent, but double is bigger, why do you recommend double anyway? And
So
Here's the link.
we're really talking about performance here, and so obviously there are cases in which it's going to make a difference in terms of performance to be sending a lot less data, is what happens if you're sending a single precision floating point. But there are times in which having the additional fidelity of actually having double precision is going to make things look better. I think that in general, what the doc is trying to point out is that because of the architecture of modern CPUs, you're really not going to lose a substantial amount of performance, really any, by going double. Most of them execute a double essentially as quickly as they execute a single precision floating point. Or a bit of arithmetic. I think the trickier part is whether or not you're going to be saturating memory bandwidth, whether how much memory you're actually taking up, all of these things. The other thing, of course, is when you're actually getting into OpenGL, into using shaders. On the other hand, there is an enormous difference between using low, medium, and high precision within your shaders. So there is there is a kind of a secondary thing when you're talking about OpenGL. And if you're going to be using low precision in your shaders, it doesn't really make sense to be feeding these things in with double precision values necessarily. But in general, I think that the doc is just simply saying that floating point is more expensive than integer math. And double precision doesn't really cost you performance; it just costs you space, and that's I think that's pretty clear. So
Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I buy that answer.
Yeah.
Next question on moderator. I've seen a post of you on G. I'm not sure who you is on G Plus about new features of the ADT. The most interesting feature for me was the ability to preview a layout in different ways, that is, multiple languages side by side. Did I miss the ETA or was none present?
I believe that was that something we showed off at Google I/O.
I actually can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, I know. I know we showed up a whole bunch of new features that are not yet available. I think those are coming. But we schedule the way stuff works. By the way, with tools is we actually develop the tools in the open. So at any time if you don't see the feature there and we've announced it, you can always go and pull the tools and build them and see whether it's actually in the version that's currently buildable on AOSP. The tools are really cool that way. I mean, I've certainly told someone, no, the bug's been fixed. We haven't rolled out a new version of the tools, but if you want, go grab that. So I don't know what the state that code currently is in, but you certainly can go and grab it and see whether that can be enabled. If it was something we showed off at Google I/O, but I don't remember when we've talked about the side-by-side previews.
Yeah, I can't remember the ETA for that being released. But again, like Dan said, it's all developed in the open. You can go ahead and take a look at the code and see what the state of that is. On top of that, actually, you could just check the release notes on the Android developer website and see what's actually in the official releases.
Do we have someone on Hangout?
Yeah, we sure do.
Okay, great. Fire away.
Oh, he just went dark.
We've got darkness on
This is.
Hangout.
Are you still there, audio-wise?
Hello? Hello?
You still there?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am.
Oh,
Ah.
I just barely hear you. Can we crank the volume?
Yeah.
Pump up the volume.
Okay.
What's that?
I was wondering, is it recommended to keep the
Hold on a second.
sidebar?
Hold on.
Is that coming out of the headphones or
Yeah,
the
it is.
speakers?
I don't know why. What the?
We're having a sound problem again.
I wouldn't worry about the screen. I'd worry about the audio.
Yeah. As far as I'm concerned, put the headphones on and tell us what he's saying. Or we put the headphones on.
All right, I'm going to listen to you on headphones.
Yes. That's cool.
Is it recommended to keep the side drawer?
Okay, I think we just lost you. Our Hangout restarted. The question I heard before it restarted was, is it recommended to keep the side drawer? I'm not sure what else followed that, so... we're coming back online. All right. You still there?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sorry, we lost you for a second there. Could you repeat that one more time?
Is it recommended to keep the side drawer constant, the pattern? And is there any way to put it on the other side of the screen?
Okay, so the question for everyone else here on set, is it recommended to keep the side drawer constant the pattern constant, or and also is it possible to move the side drawer to the other side of the screen? So I imagine this side drawer is like in Google Plus or YouTube, where you have a navigation sidebar that pops out, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so yes, that is. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the headphone... Actually, I think I can keep this on. I look sort of funny, but to answer your question...
Not as funny as I look. So I think
I'm
we're good.
gonna lean down so I can hear through his head.
Now
Go
we're all
ahead.
looking funny.
So the side drawer pattern, it's definitely picked up some popularity lately. Besides, Google Plus, YouTube's used it. I believe Facebook uses it. Evernote uses it. Definitely a lot of interest from developers. But it's not part of the official Android UI guidelines yet. It's basically something we're experimenting with. If our design team decides that it's actually something they like and they want to promote, they'll add it to the Android design website. And then we'll probably release a lot of sample code for it, or at least code snippets. But it's also entirely possible that they decide that it's not the direction they want to see Android going in right now. We don't know. We're still waiting for official feedback from them. So for that reason, we don't have much in the way of official guidance on how to implement this feature. And for that matter, again, questions like, can we move it to the other side? We're not even sure, does that make sense, right? It might make sense for maybe you have a left-handed user. I can see use cases where it would make sense to have it on the other side. From a technical perspective, we don't have anything as part of the framework that would do this for you. So it's technically possible to place it on either side, since you have to write it from scratch.
Yeah, my feeling is that since the overflow menu tends to sit on the other side, that it makes sense to have this sort of drawer functionality opposite that. But if there's a really compelling reason in your UI, and you think you're breaking new ground, as I said, there is no official pattern on this. So I think it ultimately comes down to does it serve the user well? Now the user is actually has a whole bunch of established applications that are doing it the other way. So I think it's certainly worth considering whether or not it's worth changing their expectations in this way. And that's whenever we deviate from the pattern, I think from any one of our patterns, whether it's one of the ones we've actually established or one of the ones that is sort of implied by the ecosystem, I think that it's always good to look at the user and say, what are the user's expectations, and why does changing this make sense in terms of their expectations?
Right, and yes, like Dan said, most of the time when you see a drawer on the left, it's always on the left. On top of that, also, your up button is always on the left, and users read left to right. So I think those are all really strong arguments for most of the time placing that slide out drawer on the left.
Okay. And yeah, the only reason I was wondering that was because because some users prefer having actions on the right versus left, and that was the only reason that I thought that would make sense.
Okay, so once again, for everyone here on set, basically the comment was, some users might prefer having actions on the right versus the left, and so that would be the reason why he was considering doing that. I think that's something. It's definitely a valid point to consider. But again, you have to wait with what the rest of the ecosystem's doing and what's familiar to users. So it's a very fine line there. There's not a 100% correct answer, but I'd say the 90% correct answer is it should usually be on the left.
I was going to add that Google TV, for instance, has a pattern in which they replace the top action bar with the side action bar, and the side action bar is on the left. Just because TV displays have a substantially different aspect ratio and form than mobile device displays. And as I said, this bar is on the left, and there's no option is usually provided.
That's going to give us feedback, Dan.
Yeah.
No options usually provided to move it to the right. I would say that your specific questions about should it use the same pattern, yes. Should it stay on? Should there be an option to move it to the right? I would say that it's not really necessary. I mean, it's in general, most users don't need to have that sort of option. It's preferable to have consistent UI rather than one that's infinitely malleable.
Yeah, I would say play with it. I mean, see what response.
Right.
If you're getting a lot of feedback saying you really want it on the other side, then I would say go for it. Because always ultimately you want to listen to your users, and it's something we kind of believe here to a pretty strong degree. But again, I think that there's a lot of prior art that actually has it on the left-hand side.
Yep.
Anyway, in Google TV, a lot of the reason we have it on the left is because of navigation. Because
right.
we're using a 4-way D-pad, and so it's easier to navigate into that from the left than it is to navigate up and then move through a bunch of options. So I think that was a lot of the design decision around that as well.
All right, thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you for calling in.
All right. So we have about 2 minutes left, it looks like.
Okay.
I don't think anyone else is waiting on Hangouts. So let's
We're
go
gonna
ahead and
try
take
and
one
this-
last question.
Could you recap my question on the missing shortcut docs last week? Couldn't hear most of your answer due to static. My main use case is to replicate the place on home screen menu item in the detail view of the People app. Is this possible with App Widget? I think this is where we discovered that it wasn't really an app widget, it was a shortcut.
That's
or something.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the docs were missing for those.
Ah.
Yeah, and as somebody who worked with the docs, do you want to take this one?
Yes. The only thing that we can do at this point is, have you file a bug to say we need documentation on this. Other than that, I can take it back to the documentation team and say we need more documentation on this, but that looks like it was a feature that was mostly exploited by the People app because they knew something about how the thing works and they could go directly to the engineers. And other than that, I'm not sure that there's anything else that we could do.
Yeah, no, the People app is open source though. So I always
that's
hate,
true. I didn't think about that.
I always hate sending people off to the say go look at the source when there's other options available. But in this case, there really isn't much else you can do at the moment. So go to source.android.com and you can check out the Android source tree. It's a bit large, but you can take a look at the People's app and see how they implement this. And that's probably the best resource you have available at the moment.
Right. Yeah, I would agree with that at this point.
All right, and I think we're out of time.
Yes, pretty much.
All right.
That's it, guys.
Yep, there it is.
Thanks. That was the tone.
Thank you for joining us.
So, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, we are on every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific. We love to answer your questions. You can submit them ahead of time on our moderator queue, vote them up, or join us live. And we'll see you next week, Wednesday, 2 p.m.
Great. Until then.
All right.
Oops,
See you, everyone.
wrong hand.